What if love finds you in the most unexpected betrayal? What if the one person who was never supposed to see you ends up knowing you better than anyone ever could? No one asked Isla Whitmore if she wanted to be a bride that day. Her mother's grip was steel around her wrist, dragging her across the narrow dressing room toward a gown that sparkled like a beautifully disguised trap. Her fingers were frozen, but her voice, sharp, commanding, sliced through the air. Ria's not coming. You don't get a choice. You walk down that aisle. Now, the scent of luxury perfume lingered like smoke. Heels clattered. Assistants whispered orders. A frantic knock from the wedding coordinator rattled the door. The whole room pulsed like a heartbeat in her skull. Isla didn't speak, not out of agreement, but because her voice had vanished beneath the weight of her mother's glare. If this wedding collapses, we lose everything. Your sister can't marry him, so you will. You owe me that. And Ria, her sister, her mirror in another life, stood at the threshold, arms folded, gaze hard as stone. You always wanted to wear white, didn't you? She said, her voice dipped in venom. Then act the part, finish the play. Isla was never asked, her feelings irrelevant. The decision had already been made, the gown steamed, the marriage license altered, her name replacing her sister's. And at the altar of Briarhall Chapel, under stained glass and flickering candles, stood a man waiting. Blind, brilliant, and unknowingly deceived. Adrian Wren, heir to an old money empire, celebrated composer, and, more importantly, chosen by Isla's family as their golden ticket. He was too valuable to lose, and too blind to see the betrayal. For 6 months, Isla had spoken to him under the name Ria. Her voice, her laughter, even her perfume had been trained into mimicry. Her mother once said, "Ria doesn't do romance. You do. Use it." Now, she was about to marry him, broadcast live for the city's elite to witness, a bride under the wrong name, walking into a union born of secrets. She moved like someone stepping off a cliff. The dress had been shoved on her minutes earlier, makeup applied with shaking hands, shoes forced on just as the car rolled up. Adrian stood like a sculpture, calm, elegant, unmoving. His eyes, though sightless, seemed to listen. His face tilted gently, as if catching every sound. The minister's voice rang through the echoing chapel. "Do you, Isla Whitmore, take Adrian Wren as your lawfully wedded husband, to honor, to love, to remain by his side until death parts you?" The air froze. Isla saw her mother's firm nod from afar, saw Ria's smirk, cold, triumphant. Her voice cracked. "I do." Adrian turned toward her. His voice was quiet, low. "Why are you trembling? Are you afraid I'll see you?" And in that moment, a moment that should have felt like triumph, like a conclusion, Isla realized it was only the beginning. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Adrian had felt something shift when the chapel erupted in applause, a flicker, a breath, something unspoken. And Isla knew, in that split second, she had crossed a line too far to ever retreat. She smiled, not because she meant it, but because the camera lens was zooming in, and Ria sat in the back pew, smug and victorious, like someone watching the final act of a play they had rigged from the start. Isla told herself it would last only a day, just long enough to sign some papers, play the part, and vanish from the life of a man she was never supposed to love. Like a ghost slipping out of a story that didn't belong to her. But even that lie sat wrong. The words echoed in her chest like bad dialogue, unconvincing, hollow. They did nothing to ease the knot in her throat. The wedding band on her finger still felt too cold, too new. Before she could fully feel the weight of what she'd done, she was already seated beside her husband, the man she had never seen, but whose voice she had memorized. whose breathing she could recognize even in silence. As the car doors shut, Isla glanced back once. Eversong Cathedral disappeared into the night behind tinted glass, a smear of light swallowed by shadows. Ahead of them, only darkness, and in that darkness, Adrian didn't need eyes to know she was trembling. The car, a sleek black phantom, slid soundlessly through the quiet northern roads, heading toward the Wren estate. Adrian sat upright, fingers interlaced in his lap, his eyes closed like he was sleeping. But Isla knew better. He wasn't resting. He was listening, not to the traffic, or the wind, or the wheels on wet pavement, but to her. Her breathing, the faint rustle of her gown, the softest tap of her heel against the floor mat. He was composing something in his mind, a silent symphony only he could hear. Isla kept still, kept quiet, breathed evenly, deliberately. But inside her head, the faces of her mother and Rhea hovered like ghosts, watchful, judging, their approval as sharp as a blade. From this moment on, she was Adrian's wife. No mistakes, no hesitation, no forgetting a single detail of Rhea's life. The stories, the quirks, the memories Isla had studied like lines in a script. But the second she stepped into the estate, everything began to crack. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum curated by a blind visionary, flawless but sterile. The lights were dimmed. The doors glided open soundlessly. The flowers were artfully arranged, but gave off no scent. The walls were lined with black and white photographs, but none of them showed a single face. The butler bowed. "Congratulations, ma'am." Adrian placed a hand gently on her back, guiding her into the dining hall. No words, no toast, no celebration. Just two porcelain plates on a table that stretched too far for conversation. No candles, no music, only quiet. Adrian took his seat. Isla followed, her hands gently folding in her lap. Then he spoke, his voice low, smooth, but precise as a scalpel. "Your voice. It's different." She froze. "Different how?" she asked, too quickly. "Softer, slower, a rasp near the end of your words." He paused. She didn't have that. Isla steadied herself, forcing a fragile smile. "Maybe I'm just tired. It's been a long day." He gave a small nod. Then he inhaled, deep and deliberate, as if searching the air for answers. And the perfume. "You're wearing a new one." She winced. "I forgot the usual." Another nod. No words. But something in the air between them thickened, like the space had begun to record their every breath, every choice, every silence. Dinner passed without conversation. Isla forced herself to eat. The food tasted wrong, too rich, too bitter. Adrian ate methodically, like every motion had been practiced 1,000 times. When she tried to rise from her chair, his voice halted her. "Do you remember our first phone call?" She stilled, her hand hovering above the table. "What did we talk about?" he asked, his voice calm, almost casual. "I told you about Paris. You told me about your cello." She fumbled through the memories that weren't hers. She had stepped into the story halfway through, filling in blanks left by Rhea when she'd grown tired of romantic nonsense. "Oh, right," Isla continued. "I said I wanted to open a bookstore by the lake." Adrian tilted his head. "No," he said quietly. She never said that. Isla had no idea that it had been Rhea, her sister, who'd once spoken with Adrian about orchids, about Paris, about cellos, and dreams she herself had never dared to dream. Back then, Rhea had already grown bored of what she mockingly called storybook nonsense. Isla had stepped in, halfway through the act, reciting lines she barely understood. "Oh, right," she said softly. "I told you I wanted to open a bookstore by the lake." Adrian tilted his head ever so slightly. "No," he said. She never said that. Isla froze. Adrian set down his fork. His fingers moved slowly over his napkin, like a pianist playing the final chord of a sorrowful melody. "It's fine," he murmured. "I have an excellent memory. Sometimes, too excellent, makes people uneasy." She didn't respond, just stared into her water glass, wishing it were something stronger, wishing she were someone braver. She hadn't expected the blind man to see this much, this clearly. That night, the bedroom felt like a gallery, beautiful, pristine, and impossibly cold. There was no warmth, no photographs, no clutter of ordinary living, only space, too much of it. Adrian lay on his side, facing away. Isla curled on the far edge of the bed, her body coiled like a secret. The wind slipped in through a crack in the window, chilling the air. She lay there, still, eyes on the ceiling, silent tears slipping past her lashes. And then his voice, quiet, distant, but piercing. "I don't need eyes to recognize a lie." Isla didn't know who he meant, her, Rhea, maybe even himself. But the words didn't lash out. They settled deep, like a whisper left behind in the dark. And maybe the most terrifying thing wasn't being caught. It was being seen completely, intimately, without a single place left to hide. So, was Adrian suspicious? Or had he always known? Maybe the truth wasn't in his words, but in the way he turned his head, how he listened, how he never needed vision to read the space between two people. And you, if it were you, would you keep playing the part? Or take off the mask? Knowing the other person was never truly blind. That night, though they shared a bed, Isla felt like they existed in separate galaxies. She couldn't sleep. She counted every breath he took, every shift in his posture, trying to read him like Braille. She hadn't yet learned, but Adrian never moved toward her, never accused her, never touched her. His silence wasn't neglect, it was a wall, gentle, immaculate, but cold as snow. She thought the next morning would change everything, that he'd demand answers, that he'd cast her out. But when she woke, Adrian treated her as though nothing had happened, as if she were still his wife, still Rhea. And so Isla began to live in his world, a world where quiet wasn't emptiness, it was routine, precision, calm, a life carefully constructed without noise, without drama. And in that silence, something strange began to unfold. She stopped wishing to leave. The silence, once unbearable, became soothing. Or maybe it wasn't silence at all. Maybe it was her presence reshaping what silence meant. She woke up earlier, tiptoed into the kitchen, made breakfast just the way she'd learned he liked it, from whispered notes passed to her by the house staff. She stopped calling the servants altogether. She cleaned, she touched things gently, reverently, even his study, once sealed shut since the accident. She opened and rearranged. She didn't change much, just dusted, aired out the room, tried to make it feel a little more alive. Adrian never asked why. That evening, as his fingers brushed the edge of the bookshelf, the pin holder, the window ledge, he paused. She never entered this room. Isla's breath caught. She knew who he meant, knew he could feel the difference. "I know," she said, voice small. "I just wanted it to feel more comfortable. For you." Adrian said nothing, but his knuckles curled tightly around the armrest of the chair. Later that afternoon, they walked together in the garden for the first time. Adrian left his cane behind. He let Isla guide him by hand. The breeze was soft, leaves rustled, and Isla described the world to him as if it were made of poetry. Lavenders fading, daisies still bright, hydrangeas drooping just a bit. He listened, eyes closed, not interrupting. But then, quietly, "You don't mention orchids anymore." She stopped in place. That had been Rhea. Orchids were her detail, her line. "I thought maybe," Isla whispered, Maybe today the other flowers deserved a voice. Adrian smiled, but it wasn't a carefree smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they realize, finally, that the person standing before them is someone else entirely. Adrian's smile wasn't peaceful, it was reflective. The kind of smile someone wears when they've finally stopped chasing the shadow of a person they thought they knew, and start realizing they've been speaking to someone else entirely. Night settled gently over the estate. A warm amber glow poured into the living room, and the only sounds left were the whisper of the wind slipping through the windows and the occasional soft creak of wood. Isla sat across from him reading, not Shakespeare, not Austen, none of the classics Rhea had once draped herself in. Instead, a quiet, tender novel, full of moments that didn't need to be profound to feel real. Adrian didn't interrupt, but he tilted his head, his chest rising and falling a little deeper with every paragraph. When she closed the book, he spoke, low, thoughtful. "Your voice," he said. "It's warmer now. The way you touch me, it's gentler. Even your silence feels different." Isla's hands tightened around the yard arms of the chair. He turned towards her, not seeing, but not looking away either. His eyes, though blind, met her with the kind of clarity that made her skin prickle. "If you're someone else," he said slowly, I think I might like you more." She didn't answer. Her heart thudded, hard and uneven. Was it a confession? Or was it something softer, more dangerous? A quiet unveiling. A way of saying, "I already know." And in that silence, something stirred between them. Not love, not yet, but care. Hesitation, a delicate fear, two people bound in a lie, one who couldn't see, and one who had never, in her whole life, been truly seen. The next morning, Isla sat alone in the old study she'd just finished cleaning. Sunlight scattered across the wooden floors, catching the edge of picture frames that held no memories, only blank placeholders for a family that had stopped capturing moments long ago. She didn't know why she was in that room, maybe because it was the only space untouched by anyone else. Maybe because, for the first time, she didn't want to pretend, not even to herself. The door slammed open without warning. Rhea walked in like she owned the place, which, technically, she did. Their mother followed, her heels clicking like a countdown to judgment. "We need to talk," their mother said. Isla straightened in her chair, gripping the armrest like it could keep her steady. "About what?" Rhea didn't respond at first. She wandered the room, fingers trailing across the desk, picking up a book only to toss it back with a sharp, pointed thud. "You're getting too deep," she said flatly. "The maids say you make him breakfast now. You walk him through the garden. You sit by his bed reading. Seriously, Isla, dial it back." Their mother stepped in then, voice low and deliberate, like a judge delivering a sentence. "You really think he's going to marry you again?" she said. "He doesn't belong to you. He belongs to Rhea, to this family. You were never meant to stay." Isla looked up at them, calm, not defiant, but unshaken. Something had shifted in her gaze. Not anger, but something stronger, something still. "He's not who you think he is," she said quietly. Rhea let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Not who we think? What, not a blind fool, easy to fool?" Isla's hands curled into fists. "He's kind," she said. "He's intuitive. He deserves to be treated with care, not used like a pawn, no matter who loves him." A beat of silence. Their mother raised a brow. "You think he cares about you?" she asked coldly. "You're a stand-in, Isla. He doesn't know who you are. He loves Rhea. And when he finds out the truth, what do you think he'll do?" Rhea's voice cut through next, cruel and exact. "You think he'll forgive the girl who pretended to be someone else? Who shared his bed under my name?" Isla didn't flinch. This time there were no tears waiting behind her eyes. She stood up, slowly, fully. If he finds out, she said, and he chooses to walk away, I'll let him. Because at least I never treated him like a prize to be won. The room stilled, and for the first time, neither woman had a ready reply. Then her mother whispered, as if casting a spell she hoped would wound, "Don't mistake this for love. You're living in a space that was never meant to be yours." "When I take it back," her mother had said, "you won't even have the right to cry." The door slammed behind them. Isla stood in silence. She had never pushed back like that before. Not against Rhea, and certainly not against the woman who'd raised her on guilt and threats. But the strangest part was, this time, she wasn't afraid. Now, only one question lingered in her chest, like a secret she wasn't ready to say aloud. If Adrian knew everything, every lie, every moment of borrowed identity, would he see her as a traitor, or as the only one who ever treated him like a person, not a transaction? When the house fell quiet again, Isla didn't cry. She didn't scream, but something inside her cracked, not loud, not obvious. Just a slow, silent break, like someone gently carving away the last fragile pieces of trust she had left. She walked out of the room, down the long corridor, toward the back of the house, toward the fading light. The last rays of sun filtered through the sheer curtains, painting the garden in soft gold. It looked dreamlike, faint, like something not quite real, like her. Isla sank to the edge of the porch. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them like they were the only thing holding her together. The wind stirred the trees, and the shadows grew longer. Her mother's words echoed in her ears. Rhea's laughter followed, sharp and mocking, like a cruel whisper in a locked room. "You're just a cheap imitation. You don't get to love." She hadn't said everything she wanted to. Only one sentence had made it through. "He's a good man." And somehow, that was what had made her mother laugh the hardest. As if kindness was the most foolish thing anyone could believe in. Isla buried her face in her arms. The tears didn't fall in floods. They came one at a time, heavy and slow, like her heart wasn't beating anymore, just quietly bleeding. Behind her, there was the faintest sound. She didn't need to turn around. Adrian. He sat beside her, wordless. No demands, no accusations, just presence. And in that stillness, there was weight, something full and unsaid. After a long moment, he spoke. His voice was low, even, steady. "Have you ever wished you were someone else?" The question struck like a quiet arrow. Isla looked up. "Yes," she whispered. "Every day." Adrian nodded slightly, not in pity, not in judgment, just understanding. Then, without warning, he reached out, his hand brushing hers. Not to hold it, just to touch it, like he needed to confirm she was real. "If I ever get the chance to see you," he said, his voice slow and careful, "I'm afraid I won't want to look away." Isla turned toward him, aching to meet a gaze that couldn't see her. But somehow, in that exact moment, she felt more visible than she ever had before. She tried to respond, but her throat closed, her breath shook. Her words melted before they ever made it out. Adrian didn't wait. He pulled his hand back, stood slowly. The breeze shifted his hair across his forehead as he faced the horizon. "You know," he paused, "there are some things you can only see when you're not looking with your eyes." Then he walked away, leaving Isla alone on the porch with the final traces of sunset and a heart trembling with something that felt dangerously close to breaking open. He didn't go back inside right away. Adrian stood under the awning, his back to her, silent, as if deciding whether to speak or to keep a truth sealed inside forever. Then quietly, he said, "Tomorrow, I'm going to the hospital." Isla's head lifted in shock. He didn't turn, but his voice was bare, stripped of pride. "There's a doctor in Switzerland. It's experimental. They say the odds aren't good." A pause. But there's hope. Isla opened her mouth. To stop him. To support him. To say something. Anything. But no words came, because anything she said now might break them both. Adrian lowered his head, his hands buried in the pockets of his coat. "You know what scares me most?" he said, voice soft, soft in the way that comes from something deeper than fear. "It's not that the surgery might fail." He paused, then offered a faint, nearly bitter smile. "It's that I might open my eyes and not recognize the world I once thought was beautiful." His breath caught, because maybe it never was. And then he walked into the night, leaving Isla frozen on the porch, the wind clawing at her shoulders like a whispered warning. If he sees again tomorrow, will he still want to look at me? Time passed after the surgery, like the slow turning of a book no one dared to read, each hour dragging behind the one before it. Isla didn't ask questions. Adrian didn't offer answers. She remained close, always close, like part of the house, like a piece of the stillness. She smiled less, spoke even less, because the closer they came to the day he might open his eyes, the more terrified she became of what he might see. Then the morning arrived. Soft light spilled into the windows. Birds chirped like tiny heralds of change. The sky was so clear it felt sacred, like the world itself was holding its breath for something irreversible. In the recovery room, everything was hushed. Machines hummed gently in the background, like lullabies meant to keep reality at bay. No one spoke. No one rushed. Even the air seemed tense, like the hush before a storm. Isla sat beside Adrian's bed, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her knuckles pale. She was bare now. No perfume, no silk, no borrowed identity. Just Isla, real, exposed, terrified. The woman who had once wished desperately that he could see her, now feared nothing more. Adrian lay still. The final bandages were unwrapped, one layer at a time. He didn't open his eyes at first, not out of fear perhaps, but reverence, like he was testing a part of himself that hadn't existed in years. Then he blinked. Light spilled in, sharp, immediate. But he didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the room, slowly, taking in shapes and shadows. Then they stopped. Right on her. Isla didn't move. Couldn't. Her lungs forgot how to work. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the sound alone would give her away. Adrian looked at her. He didn't squint, didn't recoil, didn't turn away. He simply looked, as if he had expected her to be there. Not with surprise, but with recognition. Isla's lips parted, but no sound came. Only her eyes spoke, wild with fear, trembling with something dangerously close to love. "You're not Rhea," Adrian said at last. His voice was even, measured, like a verdict finally spoken. It wasn't cruel, but it shattered her all the same. Isla staggered back half a step. Her hands clenched, her mouth trembled. Any excuse, any prepared line, felt brittle and false. But Adrian didn't stop. He sat up, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've known," he said, "for a long time." His gaze sharpened, not angry, but clear. "From the way you speak, from how you always set the tea on the left, not the right, from the way you say, 'I'm sorry,' like no one has ever forgiven you." The tears came suddenly, violently. Isla collapsed into herself, her hands covering her face, her body trembling, not from guilt, but from a deeper, more dangerous fear. That even after everything, she still wasn't someone who could be loved. "Why?" she choked out between sobs. "Why didn't you say something? Why did you let me keep lying to you?" Adrian rose slowly. Every step he took brought him closer to her, to the truth, to the moment they could no longer run from. He stopped in front of her. The silence between them stretched, full of everything still unsaid. Then gently, he reached out. Adrian knelt in front of her, his hands gentle, as they reached for her face. With trembling fingers, he wiped away the tears that had long since turned bitter. "I was waiting," he said, voice low but unwavering, "to see if you could love me as a man, and not just the final move in your family's scheme." Isla looked up, stunned into stillness. Her eyes met his, still adjusting, still slightly unfocused from the surgery, but warm, like the very first sun after a long winter. Unfiltered, real. Adrian inhaled, as if preparing to say something sacred. And then, for the first time, he spoke her real name, Isla. He didn't say it with rage. He didn't say it with judgment. He said it like it mattered, like the name had never been spoken aloud before and was finally being honored. Something inside her broke again, but this time she didn't turn away. She let him see every tear, every truth. Adrian's voice softened further. "I didn't fall in love with you because you reminded me of someone. I fell in love with you because you were brave enough to be different. Because you stayed when I had nothing left to offer but blindness and silence." He pulled her into an embrace. Not desperate, not dramatic, just enough. Enough to wrap around a heart that had begun, quietly, to want healing. At the doorway behind them, Rhea stood, still, pale, watching a moment she could no longer rewrite. She didn't speak. She didn't step forward. Adrian didn't acknowledge her. He simply murmured, perhaps only to himself, "I was blind. But in the dark, I saw you most clearly." And Isla, for the first time in her life, didn't have to become someone else to be loved. If you were Adrian, would you forgive? If you were Isla, would you dare to love with nothing left to hide? This isn't just a story about romance. It's a story about choosing between comfort and truth, about the kind of love that doesn't require masks. If this story has stirred something inside you, share your thoughts. And if you want more stories that reach beneath the surface, don't forget to subscribe. After the day Adrian opened his eyes, the world didn't erupt with drama the way Ikla imagined. No screaming, no grand revelations, no sudden collapse, just silence. A slow, careful silence, like the two of them were walking across fragile ice, beneath which lived everything they hadn't yet said. Adrian didn't pull away, but he didn't draw closer either. He was polite, gentle, kind, as he had always been, only now he could see. And that alone terrified Isla more than anything else. She felt seen, truly seen, and because of that, more exposed than ever before. For a week, they lived like strangers, with shared memories. They didn't sit at the same table, didn't walk in the garden at the same time, didn't brush against each other in passing, but silence isn't forever. That afternoon, the sky was overcast. The back garden smelled of drying herbs. The season was beginning to shift. Isla sat quietly in a wrought iron chair beside the fading lavender. Her hands rested on her lap. Her shoulders were tense but still. Adrian came outside, slowly. He didn't seem to have planned it. But he stopped when he saw her, and stayed. They sat across from each other like participants in an unspoken farewell. Isla kept her gaze low. Her voice was hoarse, not from crying, but from everything she had never said. "I didn't come for you," she whispered. "Not at first. I came because of a promise. A phone call I couldn't ignore." Adrian didn't react, but his hands tightened slightly in his lap. Still, she went on. "But I stayed. Not because I had to. I stayed for you." Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. "I stayed for the nights I read to you, for the moments I touched your forehead and hoped you wouldn't notice how badly my hands shook, for every time I sat next to you and wished I had the courage to tell you that those moments were real, that I was real." Adrian closed his eyes, then slowly opened them. There was no anger there, but something softer, a sadness that only comes when the truth arrives too slowly. Adrian opened his eyes again. No tears, no dramatic gasp, but something in him had softened, subtle, like the shift of wind before a storm. He spoke slowly, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. You were the only one who didn't try to control me when I was blind. You didn't tell me how to be. You didn't fill the silence with expectations. He paused. You just sat with me. And you listened. The words halted Isla's breath. She wanted to speak, to explain, to fall apart. But all she could do was shake her head, wordless. I don't need your forgiveness, she whispered. I only need you to see me. Just me. Adrian didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, like he was reading not just her face, but every unspoken thought, every wound beneath the surface. Then he stood. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but like something in him had finally settled. After so many days of silence, he extended his hand toward her. If you're still here tomorrow morning, he said, then stay. Isla looked up, her fingers trembling. Not because I need you, he continued, but because I want to begin again. With you, he paused again, his eyes catching the last fragments of evening light, soft, golden, like a promise. And for the first time, Isla didn't need to hide. She raised her hand to her mouth, steadying herself against the weight of something breaking open. Not pain, but hope. She didn't nod. She didn't cry. But in her eyes, something returned. Not just love, but worth. A quiet place in someone's heart she didn't have to steal or borrow. Because it had always, silently, been waiting for her. 1 year later. In the Oregon mountains, where the mist clings to the trees like memory, and the sun filters through the pines like a whispered blessing, there is a quiet retreat by a silver lake. On the hand-carved wooden sign, it reads, The Touch of Light. Isla and Adrian live there now. They don't call it escape. They call it rebirth. Every morning, Isla guides blind students along the lake's edge, teaching them to walk with their ears, to navigate with scent and instinct, to find rhythm in their own footsteps. Adrian teaches music. The same man who once dismissed melody as background noise now plays with a reverence that softens every room. He teaches not just by sound, but by feel. His voice gentler than it's ever been. No one here calls him a millionaire. They call him the man who once saw in the dark. And Isla, no one misnames her anymore. Her identity, once borrowed and blurred, is now her own. Meanwhile, far away in a marble villa in Florida, Rhea is married to a rising senator. Young, magnetic, full of ambition. But 4 months ago, a car crash took his sight. Now every morning, Rhea brews his tea, helps him choose his suits, and slowly learns to describe a sunset to a man who will never see one. That man, so sweet, so trusting, calls her the light of his life. And every time he says it, Rhea smiles, but it always ends the same way, with the smallest curl of her lip, and a silence that stretches on like regret. One morning, while applying her lipstick, her assistant's voice echoed from the Bluetooth speaker. In today's headlines, philanthropist Adrian Wren has been awarded the International Humanitarian Prize for his work with the blind community alongside his wife, Isla Whitmore. The lipstick faltered in her hand. A second passed. Then she laughed, not bitter, not broken, just empty. Like something deep inside her had quietly, finally collapsed. She set the lipstick down, poured tea, and as she handed the cup to her husband, she leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for the wind to remember, I'm not the light, my love. I'm just the shadow that stood in the wrong place. Because love does not punish. but it never forgets. And in the end, the ones who love truthfully will see. The ones who pretend will perform forever until there's no audience left to believe them. Those who love with truth in their hearts, they will always see, even in darkness. But those who live behind a mask, they'll keep performing endlessly until there's no audience left to clap for a role that was never real. Thank you for walking this fragile, brave, and beautiful path with Isla and Adrian. If something in their story stirred a quiet place in you, if it reminded you of the power of honesty, the ache of love, or the courage it takes to be seen, leave a comment, or simply share this moment with someone who needs a little light today. Because sometimes, light doesn't come from the eyes, it comes from being understood. And if you believe in stories that make your heart tremble just a little, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because who knows, the next story might be yours.